Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Dragonus Podcastus. I am your host, Deadponic, and once again, joining me is the lovely Queen Byron. Lady Byron.
Hello, everyone.
How are you doing?
Good. Excited about today's topic.
Yes. Before we actually get started on that, I got a couple announcements to make. I'm actually looking into making an actual dedicated channel for the podcast. That's going to take some time, but it's in the works. We have the Dragonus Podcastus bingo card. We might have bloopers if they happen, depends on how that works. And we might be doing commissions, depending on how we do in terms of these episodes and how much support we get. We might be doing commissions. It depends. I mean, I might be doing commissions, but yeah, those are my announcements. And this is going to be Queen Byron's show for this episode. Do you want to tell us what we are actually what we're going to be talking about for this episode?
Today we are talking about the new book release, Mordenkainen Presents Monsters of the Multiverse.
Yes. And for those who are not sorcerer oriented, magic oriented, and this is actually me too. Who is Mordenkainen? Besides, having his name plastered all over like a bunch of spells. Besides that, who is this guy?
Yeah, Mordenkainen was actually the second playable character from Gary Gygax, one of the creators of D&D. And from there, he kind of achieved god status and became an NPC in the setting of Greyhawk, and has had several spells named after him. If you look through the Player's Handbook spell list, you've got Mordenkainen's Faithful Hound, Mordenkainen's Mansion. Several of the spells there listed are named after him because he was a prolific spellcaster and a scholar. So in Forgotten Realms lore and in Greyhawk lore, he developed these spells. He created these spells. So he's one of the kind of OG spellcasters, if you could say that.
Yeah, basically. And didn't he like fight a dragon or something, or is that just something they depict on the cover?
He's probably faced dragons. The lore surrounding Mordenkainen has almost grown past his own identity, where, like I said, he's kind of achieved this almost godlike status. So there's quite a few myths, if you will. But Mordenkainen has been around the block, if you could put it that way. And this is actually the second book that he's penned, kind of in this 5th edition. So you have Mordenkainen's
Tome of Foes.
Yes, we have Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, thank you, which was kind of written as if Mordenkainen, famous wizard and adventurer, had written kind of like a bestiary of the monsters that he'd faced. And now, with some of the changes that Wizard of the Coast has been making to 5th edition, they put out the second book, Mordenkainen Presents Monsters of the Multiverse. So we're kind of seeing some changes to the player races, some changes to the bestiary, and then also kind of a touch upon the multiverse aspect that D&D is getting into, with new settings coming out, like Spelljammer and things like that have been announced for coming in the future. So we're seeing that they're expanding into the multiverse. Most of the 5th edition books are set in Forgotten Realms. That's kind of the classic fantasy setting. The Sword Coast is Forgotten Realms. Waterdeep is in Forgotten Realms. But now we're seeing that they're expanding that. They're going to be putting out more settings. And it makes sense that Mordenkainen would have encountered monsters from different multiverses. Again, well-traveled person. He spent time in Barovia. He spent time in Waterdeep. He's got a huge backstory. So he's obviously well-versed in monsters, like I said, being a traveled adventurer. So we have a bestiary, and it's got some player races in it too, now from Mordenkainen.
I see. And wasn't he a bit eccentric, and didn't he have a working relationship with Tasha?
Yes, so Tasha is another famous spellcaster, also from Greyhawk setting, technically. Supposedly she is the daughter of Baba Yaga, and a prolific spellcaster in her own right.
Wait. Baba Yaga is in the Boogeyman, or am I thinking of something else?
The witch with the walking hut.
Okay, because I was thinking John Wick because Baba Yaga.
Yeah,
Okay.
so maybe we'll do an episode on Tasha sometime in the future. But yeah, Mordenkainen has had relations with her, or like a working relationship with her, both being from the Greyhawk setting, technically, which was Gary Gygax's first setting creation. We don't really have a lot of Greyhawk content in 5th edition, but we do have these two spellcasters who have obviously traveled quite a lot, right? Like we said, Mordenkainen has traveled through the multiverse, so it makes sense. He's from Greyhawk, but now he's in Forgotten Realms. He is known for being a bit eccentric. When he was trapped in Barovia, he tried to fight Strahd, underestimated the Dark Lord's power, and was exiled to the mountains there in Barovia. Kind of lost his mind for a couple of centuries or so. Not in the best of shape. Eventually made his way to Waterdeep. Kind of a similar story where he's not, of sound mind. There are two adventures, one of them being the Mad Mage, Dungeon of the Mad Mage. That's Mordenkainen. So you have these adventures set in Waterdeep, and those are based around Mordenkainen and his madness, basically.
Okay, so since I have a copy of the actual book, believe it or not, so basically, from my understanding here, there are several new, or at least races from the monsters, the monster manual that are now playable races. I have a couple of questions, believe it or not. So now these new changes is that one of them is the ability score increase. So instead of it being, you can increase one score by 2 and then another by 1, or you go you increase 3 different scores by 1. Now obviously you can't raise any of your scores over 20, but was this always implemented in 50, or was this just a recent change that they made with this book?
So, yes and no. When 5th edition first came out, they had static bonuses for each race. Tasha's Cauldron of Everything was printed. They released these two new features, one called Custom Lineage and one called Custom Origin. The Custom Origin allows you to put your points, your ability score increases in any stat. So, like you were saying, you can get a +2 to one and a +1 to another, or 3 +1s to 3 different stats. This is a change that we've seen Wizards of the Coast making, trying to, make the races more inclusive, moving evil alignments like automatically from certain races and making them more equal across the board so that there's no one race that's geared toward fighting specifically. If you wanted to play a fighter, you could still be a halfling with an 18 strength if you put your points in it, right? So with the Mordenkainen's new book, we're seeing this continuation of this idea that the races have special features and traits and things like that, but the points are where the person, the player decides to put them. So you could have a halfling that's very strong, or you can have a hobgoblin who's very charismatic. So they're not tied to their ability score bonuses as they were even in earlier versions of 5th edition books.
Okay. And since I'm like very old school, so a lot of these monsters from the monster manual would not have been playable races in AD&D 2nd edition, but now thanks to 5th edition, you can now play as them. The one of them that I'm actually interested in is actually, this is going to cause some confusion for some people, but bugbears. I actually didn't know what a bugbear looked like, and I didn't even know they were cousins of goblins and hobgoblins. Oh yeah, speaking of which, what is the difference between a goblin and a hobgoblin?
So I believe that a goblin is kind of your typical green character, right? Whereas a hobgoblin is typically they have orange or reddish skin, and they tend to be stronger, and their ancestry and their kind of culture tends to be more geared towards honor, fighting, warfare, and things like that. Now, one thing I want to point out is that while we have some changes in this new Mordenkaisen's book, there's nothing new. There's nothing that wasn't printed before. So with the Mordenkainen Presents Monster of the Multiverse, it's kind of like errata for two earlier books, one being Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes and one being Volo's Guide to Monsters. So these two earlier books introduce some of these more fantastical races, some of these creatures who were just, monsters before as player races. And they had more bestiary options as well. Now with the Mordenkainen's new book, it's kind of like updating some of what you might say antiquated or depreciated options from the first two books. So Bugbear, Hobgoblin, the Yuan-Ti, these have been playable races for a little while now, but Wizards of the Coast has done a bit of a rework. They've given some different features to some of these different races where they didn't have before. And I think they kind of wanted to make it a bit more concise and bring in races from some of the different alternate settings. So like Eberron has a changeling race. Well, it's also in Mordenkainen's Presents Monster of the Multiverse. So maybe your DM doesn't allow setting-specific books like Eberron, but they'll allow this new book from Mordenkainen, then you can play as a changeling.
Which is fascinating because changelings have always been something I've always been interested in. And for me, when I do my campaign, I try to implement every conceivable resource that I can get my hands on. And basically, if you can come up with a reason why you were playing that specific race, I'll allow it, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
By far my favorite race out of the new book is definitely let me see, it's the Eladrin, which is the one that looks like a fire elf.
Mm-hmm.
Which is really cool. They basically they have this whole thing about the seasons, and
Mm-hmm.
I really like that. I like that whole idea that they're basically based around the seasons, and that's how they operate. There's a lot of monsters that are a lot of playable races that are tied to the Feywild. What is the
Mm-hmm.
Feywild?
So again, the Feywild is kind of like one of those alternate dimensions. Feywild is mostly where the Fey come from, and fairies, things like that. We are seeing more content coming from the Feywild with the new adventure, the Witchlight Carnival. And again, you kind of see that Mordenkainen has traveled through many dimensions and across different planes and across the multiverse. So we're seeing different creatures from some of these different places. What's also really interesting is that several of the races have had their stat block updated to include Fey ancestry. So like now we see that goblins and hobgoblins and changeling now are considered Fey. So they would be targeted by spells that target Fey, but that also gives them some upsides with Fey ancestry and things like that. So it's been interesting to see kind of what they've decided to rework and what changes they've decided to make to these existing races. Some boons, right, with some benefits and some things that were definitely drawbacks or nerfs to the race.
Yeah, I find a lot of these races to be quite fascinating. The I think the only race that really kind of gives me the shivers, because I played a lot of like actual D&D video games. Like there was actually a Forgotten Realms video game called the Dragonstone, and you actually fight a Gith. How do you pronounce it? Githyanki or
Yeah,
Githyank?
yep, Githyanki. Yeah, you
Yeah,
got it.
yeah. Githyanki, if I'm not mistaken, they are natural. They're basically. Actually, I don't know much about the Githyanki beyond the fact that they are really, really good warriors, and they have a thirst for battle, and they're basically um warmongering elves. If that's the best way to describe them, and the fact that they're now a playable race is gonna shake me up, because I have a lot of like memories like where my dad ran like campaigns with Githyanki, and they decimated my party like all the
Mm-hmm.
time, which is scary. And I think my other favorite race here by far would have to be the Herongon. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah. Heron.
Yeah, so now you can play as a rabbit. That's great.
Yeah. So again, this is one of the races that was introduced in a setting-specific book. They were introduced in the Wild Beyond the Witchlight Carnival adventure, and now they're printed in this more generic book, which I hear mixed reviews of kind of reprinted content, but I, for one, quite enjoy it because, like I said, some DMs have a specific campaign setting in mind, or a vibe, if you will, for their campaign, and they won't allow players to take choices from setting specific books or adventures like the Witchlight Carnival, for example. But when you have a more generic book that is just a compilation of different races and beasts, obviously, that tends to, be allowed more often by DMs. So maybe they ban the Witchlight book and you can't take options from there, but the Herringon are listed in Mordenkainen Presents Monsters of the Multiverse. So that gives you that option. The same with the Sea Elf, which was originally printed in the pirate setting adventure, the Saltmarsh, Ghosts of Saltmarsh. So when you have content that's kind of scattered across several books, it's nice to have it compiled, right, into one source so it's easier to find.
Yeah, it's really nice to have like it all in one book, so you're not like buying all the books. And
well, I'm still buying all the books, but yes, I think for people who may be on a budget, or if they don't want to buy campaign-specific books or setting-specific books, this is a great option for them.
Yeah. One thing I want them to kind of include eventually, if they do make another down the line, is I want them to have like the vampire as a playable race, unless that's already a thing in another book.
It is already a thing. It's called a Dampier.
Ah, okay.
Yep.
Okay. And actually, this is going to surprise you. I actually know what a Kenku is.
Okay.
because I actually had someone play a Kenku in my campaign, and I actually know what they do, thankfully.
Very nice.
Yeah, and I find a lot of these races very fascinating, and I find it's weird because if you were like back in the olden days, back in when I was a young lad, a lot of these races would either be just monsters, or they would just be combat encounters, or they would be NPCs. So it's really nice to have this, and I really like this. And having some background on Mordenkainen, especially because I didn't know who he was until I did my research for him. It's nice to know that, and like you said, he's been around.
Yeah, so again, we are kind of seeing where Wizard of the Coast is kind of making a shift a little bit, where bugbears, hobgoblins, lizard folk maybe, or Yuan-Ti, some of these creatures where they may have had evil in their stat block somewhere, now we're seeing that they're making each race unique and distinct, definitely still, with their own cultures and ancestries and all those good things, but they're not necessarily inherently evil. And with this change, now we're also seeing that you could play as a hobgoblin, Yuan-Ti, or whatever, what used to be just considered monster, right? They're a monster, they're a menace. Now we're seeing kind of a cultural shift in the way that D&D is written to include nuance. There's an area for gray, right? It's not just black and white. And with that, I think it's been giving players more options for more races, which I think is fascinating. And I love to see what players can come up with when they have more options available to them.
Yeah, the next book I want them to do is I kind of want them to either rework certain classes, or make it so that it's more inviting for it's more new player friendly, so you're not
Mm-hmm.
overwhelmed with overall all these mechanics.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, is there a race in this book that will be like perfectly optimized for a very specific class, or can you play like any class with these races?
Yeah, so again, we're seeing that change kind of where Wizards of the Coast has made it, you can put your bonuses in any stat. So you can really play any race or any class with any of these races. Now, if you have uh, if you're playing kind of with a legacy content in mind, maybe you're thinking, that, like I said, the hobgoblins are very geared toward honor, warfare, fighting, and things like that. That's definitely still valid if you wanted to play your hobgoblin that way. But you could also play a hobgoblin who's more sensitive. Maybe they're a bard. Maybe they play music. Maybe they enjoy art. Or maybe they're a cleric. They want to heal people and, spread the word about whatever deity they've chosen. So it gives, again, we're seeing more player options, more freedom, and more, customization available to each person for whatever they want to play.
Which is really nice. And
Yeah.
I think would you recommend getting this book, or would you as part of like a starter set or something, or like for a brand new D&D player, would you recommend this book?
Well, I would say for a brand new D&D book, the Player's Handbook is still absolutely the best choice. And then after that, uh, there's Xanthar's Guide, which has a lot of fantastic player options, including backstory, details, and feats and things like that. I would put this new book, Mordenkainen Presents Monsters of the Multiverse, a little bit down the line because some of these races have more intricate features, which might scare off a new player. And between the Player's Handbook and Xanthar's Guide, those have some really fantastic options that are great for people who are just starting. But if you're wanting to get to something that's a bit more complex, or maybe one of these races catch your eye, kind of like what you were saying about the Eladrin, then yeah, go for it. Don't be intimidated. I don't think any options are too overwhelming, but if you're just starting out and you want to just stick with the basic, you can't go wrong with the Player's Handbook.
Yeah, the Player's Handbook has always been like the best. It's like your best friend. It's literally
Hmm.
you literally can't go wrong, and you literally can't go anywhere without it because you
Yeah.
practically need it at a table, which is great. And the thing that I always say is that the book is not, it doesn't determine, it doesn't, it's not, the rules are not absolute. It's more like
Hmm.
guidelines than actual rules. But
Right.
it's good for having a foundation for understanding the rules, for especially for a new player,
Hmm.
which is great. Um, so yeah, any more thoughts before we wrap up? Oh, did you want to cover like a couple of the monsters in the bestiary section, or did you kind of want to do?
Sure.
Okay. Uh,
So, um, yeah, well, again, I think a lot of these monsters are not necessarily new, but they are reworks, kind of previous editions. So they're kind of shifting, if you will, the D&D canon and kind of the way that they write content. And with this book, we're seeing that shift, in full force. So again, they're taking off evil alignments, not no race is inherently evil is kind of what they're getting at. And they've kind of reworked the stat block so that they're a little bit easier to read. They have kind of a little bit of a clearer layout. The change is very subtle if you didn't know what to look for. Um, but yeah, lots of great monsters in here. If you don't already have Volo's guide, Volo's Guide to Monsters, Mordenkainen and Tome of Foes, this is a great one to get. It's got a bunch of new things. Some of my favorite monsters include the cranium rats. So imagine a rat, but it's the top of its head's removed and it's got a glass dome. Its brain is
oh
exposed,
God, no, come on. Oh God.
and they can actually cast spells as a swarm. So it's really fascinating, and it's something the players probably will not expect because what rat casts spells, right? It's great stuff. Um, then you've also got, aberrations related to the Mind Flayer, like the Elder Brain, you know, things like that. That tends to be a more serious monster, if you're putting that in front of your party, but can be fun, right?
Yep.
And
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, no, just a lot of great options. More Duergar variants. So if you have setting in the Underdark, or maybe if you're playing Icewind Dale, which has a bunch of Duergar in it, this is a great option for you. Lots of good things to look at.
Yeah, one particular monster that really kind of sends a bad chill down my spine is the Alkalith, which is basically just it's taken for fungal growth, but in reality, this thing is basically it acts as the first part of a portal, and oh boy, does this thing is scary. It kind of reminds
Not
me
good.
it kind of reminds me of the green slime from the Tomb of Horrors in a way, but thankfully I'm hoping that they please tell me they don't have like the old version of Tomb of Horrors in 5th edition.
Tomb of Annihilation is about as close as it gets, I think, but it's not as deadly as it was.
Oh no! If you actually played that back in the day, like it was basically the whole reason it was created was to give the players basically a challenge and basically to say, yeah, you can't take anything for granted, and basically it was just a massive troll to the players. And even if you got to the end, it's like, oh well, guess what? Here's the boss, and guess what? It's what you think is a demi-lich is not actually a demi-lich. The demi-lich is actually just a skull, and it's pretty powerful too, if I remember correctly. Yeah, and as I was actually reading through the book last night, I came across a lot of monsters that kind of give me the shivers. Like some of these are like really scary. Like, and from when I was watching the Dungeon Dudes, they actually talked about a couple of monsters that were actually really horrifying too. Actually, one of them is in this book, if I remember correctly. I have to find it, but oh boy, I can't wait to like throw this at a party. Actually, hang on. Where is the like? Oh, this is a great book. Any more thoughts before we wrap up? Or did you want to tell our audience what we're going to be doing next week?
I'd like to hear you tell them.
Okay, so next week, because if you guys have watched the last episode, we did our first official roleplay for the channel, or for the series. Lady Byron has received a mysterious letter summoning her to the palace, where she is going to be knighted. I'm currently working on the transcript for that. We'll see what happens, because you never know with these adventures and these little role playing sessions. Oh God, the corpse flower! I just saw the corpse flower. Why does this thing exist?
So that I can put it against my players in Barovia.
Yeah. You know what a hanging tree is, right? Like the actual monster?
Yes, I do.
Oh God. Oh God. Oh, thank God.
Fun stuff.
Thank God there's no hanging trees in Howell's Peak. Oh, there's the cranium rats. Oh God, no! Why? Oh God.
I warned you.
Oh man. Okay, well, I'm not gonna sleep properly tonight. Anyway, all right. So that's the episode. Any more thoughts before we wrap up?
Stay spooky.
Yeah, and maybe we'll do a Halloween episode where we throw like a random scary monster at players if we get
nice.
that far. Yeah, that would be great. Anyway, we'll see you next week. Oh, did we get any? I wonder if we got any hits on the bingo card.
Oh, I don't know.
We'll have to see. We haven't even come up with a prize for that. So that's another thing we have to work on. But see you guys later. We'll be back next week.